Everyone tells you the same story. The 1973 oil embargo killed the American muscle car. It's simple, it's memorable, and it's wrong. By the time gas lines formed, a Chevelle SS 454 had already lost more than half its horsepower, from 450 down to roughly 215, and not a single barrel of oil was responsible. The embargo didn't cause Detroit's decline, it exposed one already underway. So, what actually changed the cars? The 1973 oil embargo was a stress test, not the disease. It merely exposed structural vulnerabilities inside an industrial system that was already failing to adapt. Detroit entered the 1970s locked into rigid 5-year development cycles, leaving domestic manufacturers flat-footed against a sudden wave of federal safety and emissions mandates. Rather than committing to clean sheet engineering to meet these standards, the Big Three bolted heavy bumpers and primitive emissions controls onto aging vehicle architectures, severely degrading performance and assembly quality long before fuel prices spiked. Ultimately, the gas crisis changed the market. Regulation, corporate complacency, and weak adaptation changed the cars. California began forcing vehicle emission standards in 1968, initiating a regulatory wave that the federal government nationalized through the Clean Air Act of 1970. This new federal mandate demanded a 90% reduction in hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide by 1975. Facing tight development timelines, Detroit chose to retrofit existing engines rather than design new, clean-sheet power plants. Engineers bolted on a complex patchwork of hardware, adding air injection pumps, evaporative charcoal canisters, exhaust gas recirculation valves in 1972, and restrictive catalytic converters by 1975. To prevent engine knock on newly mandated unleaded gasoline, manufacturers slashed compression ratios from muscle car peaks of 11:1 down to 8:1, while retarding ignition timing. The physical toll on performance was immediate and stark. In 1970, the top-tier Chevelle SS 454 LS6 produced 450 gross horsepower. By 1975, the same displacement big block engine in the Malibu Classic gasped out just 215 net horsepower. While a portion of this drop reflected the 1972 industry transition from gross to net horsepower rating standards, the physical power loss was massive. These early emissions fixes also created a fuel efficiency paradox. A Bureau of Mines technical study revealed that simply disabling the primitive 1973 exhaust gas recirculation systems improved fuel economy by an average of 9%. Because these early devices were restrictive retrofits rather than fully integrated systems, they forced engines to run rich, choke, and consume more fuel. Performance and mileage remained severely compromised until the early 1980s, when mechanical carburetors were finally replaced by digital fuel injection and electronic engine control. The National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act of 1966 initiated a parallel engineering crisis that physically reshaped the American automobile. Federal mandates forced a rapid succession of structural additions: energy-absorbing steering columns, padded interiors, door-mounted side impact beams, and, by 1973, heavy 5-mile-per-hour impact bumpers. Because Detroit relied on aging vehicle architectures, these safety systems were bolted onto existing frames rather than built into clean sheet designs. The physical penalty was severe. A 1970 Chevelle ended up roughly 300 to 400 pounds heavier than its mid-1960s equivalent by the mid-decade. This sudden mass escalation occurred at the worst possible moment. As primitive emissions controls choked engine output, this added weight compounded the power loss, making already detuned cars feel even less lively. The design compromises became highly visible. The 1974 Mustang II, with its protruding structures and awkward bumper overhang, became the clean visual symbol of this transition. Vehicles still maintained their muscular styling cues, but underneath the sheet metal, they had lost the power-to-weight ratio that made them legendary. Before the first oil barrel was withheld in 1973, Japanese manufacturers were already exporting a structural threat to Detroit. Toyota, Honda, and Datsun built lightweight unibody cars with small displacement engines designed for efficiency and reliability. While these foreign compacts offered an alternative, Detroit remained bound to 3 to 5 year product development cycles, leaving domestic giants unable to pivot when market demands shifted. Rushed attempts to compete yielded catastrophic engineering compromises. General Motors introduced the 1970 Chevrolet Vega, featuring an aluminum engine block topped with a cast-iron cylinder head. The dissimilar metals expanded at different rates under thermal stress, warping the block, blowing head gaskets, and prompting massive warranty claims. At Ford, accounting calculations overrode safety engineering during the development of the Pinto. An internal cost-benefit analysis calculated that paying $5 million in fire injury liability lawsuits was more profitable than spending $11 per vehicle to secure the fuel tank. This corporate calculus, codified on paper, exposed a systemic failure. The decline of the American automobile was ultimately a failure of corporate adaptation. In September 1970, 400,000 United Automobile workers walked out, starting a 67-day strike against General Motors that cost the company over $1 billion in lost production. When the assembly lines restarted, the rush to recover lost volume broke quality control, exposing severe friction on the factory floor. Production consistency vanished, varying wildly from plant to plant and shift to shift. A car built on a Wednesday morning was often a completely different vehicle than one assembled on a Friday afternoon. On the road, buyers faced the physical results: misaligned body panels, dashboard rattles, early body rust, and premature mechanical failures. This systemic manufacturing collapse affected every domestic automaker. Throughout the decade, Consumer Reports reliability surveys documented this decline, consistently placing domestic vehicles at the bottom of their lists while Japanese imports swept the top spots for durability. By the mid-1970s, this quality gap hardened into a permanent trust gap. Detroit was no longer failing to meet safety and emissions standards, it was failing to build a durable machine. When the oil embargo hit in October 1973, it did not create the vulnerabilities in American showrooms. It exposed them. For years, domestic manufacturers had been building vehicles that grew heavier, slower, and increasingly frustrating to own. Rising fuel prices simply transformed these hidden engineering compromises into an immediate, unavoidable financial penalty for the everyday buyer. Drivers who were already struggling with stalling engines, rusting body panels, and deteriorating assembly quality suddenly had a concrete reason to walk away. The gas crisis did not kill the American car. It made the cost of owning one impossible to ignore. Every extra pound of bolted-on safety steel and every choked, carbureted engine now carried a measurable price tag at the pump. Detroit lost buyers because the alternatives now looked better in the exact areas that mattered most. This shift in consumer behavior accelerated a trend that was already gaining momentum. Japanese manufacturers had been building an import foothold throughout the late 1960s. Import market share, which stood at roughly 15% in 1970, climbed to over 26% by 1980. This was not a temporary reaction to high fuel costs, but a permanent realignment of buyer trust. The oil embargo was the stress test, not the disease. The fundamental damage to Detroit's reputation was already done, sealed inside the product long before the pumps ran dry. When the market shifted, buyers looked at the foreign alternatives and realized they offered a level of durability and economy that domestic automakers had spent a decade treating as an afterthought. The crisis did not change what made a good car. It simply made Detroit's failure to build one undeniable. Today, as automakers face a new era of rapid transition, the 1970s serve as a stark warning. External crises do not break industries, they merely act as a stress test for internal decay. In a changing world, complacency is the real defect. Let us know your thoughts below.